similar truth claims. And I understand the impulse to do that. I mean, I'm not faulting anybody for being human here. But what I really object to is the notion that I have this idea that I read from some guy who wrote in the 1970s, and this guy doesn't have a command of the scientific worldview. He doesn't have a command of the ancient text, but I'm still going to believe him because that just makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside, or that helps me hate this other thing.
Yeah, now you know how I feel whenever anyone cites Hoagland.
Yeah, exactly. I don't. If you're gonna try for worldview option number 3, there ought to be some basis somewhere for it. And the idea that there are extrasolar planets, well, duh. Okay, I mean, even before the modern discoveries, we had people thinking about that, speculating on it. The question of other worlds, going all the way back to Aristotle and the Christian thinkers, and everybody's onto this. Mm-hmm. Just because the idea is being entertained doesn't mean that it's real. And so, even though we have extrasolar planets, the idea that this somehow connects to what Ancient Aliens is saying. I mean, it's a non sequitur, so it's worldview by non sequitur. Again, in broad strokes, that I really object to. I'm willing to put your idea, of ancient, ancient, visitations by, aliens, on the table, if first of all we can know for sure, A, that there are intelligent extraterrestrials, and B, that they actually came here. Once those two things are known, we can talk about what they might have done and who they might have encountered and who might have written about them in some way. But people don't want to, go after those first two things, in that order. They just like the idea, and it doesn't matter how many non sequiturs they have to build, to this bridge from what I like to convincing someone else to like it. It just doesn't matter to a lot of people. I think it's really poor thinking. So I'm concerned about that because it becomes a religion. It becomes an alternative, worldview or religion for a lot of people, and they sort of orient themselves to this thing that really has nothing going for it, either philosophically or scientifically.
So you mentioned the interpretation or a literal reading of the text. I guess one of the classic ones, and I'm pretty sure I've heard George Norrie ask you about every time you're on, is the Ezekiel's wheels within wheels. So, I mean, I guess the ancient alien people like to say, well, this is clearly they're describing a spaceship or a beam ship or something like that. So I'm curious.
Clearly.
So I'm curious as to how you would go about saying, well, no, this isn't what it's saying. We have to interpret it relative to the time that it was written. Could you go through sort of that example, or if there's a better one that you like more? But basically, an example.
Oh no, that's a good one. I mean, I'm always fascinated how the aliens managed to build the landing legs of their craft to look just like cow legs. I mean, that's just an amazing coincidence to me. If you want to press literalism, if the writer is using that description, then the first reflex would be like, well, they would have known what a cow's leg looks like back then. It's an agrarian culture, so okay, we'll give them that. And what might they be talking about that in their artwork or their iconography that used cow legs that match up with the rest of the description? But no, we don't go there. We aren't consistently literalistic. We're going to take an idea and then literalize it to the point where it must have been a craft, even though the account says it was on the ground.
So what is the broader context? Because I'm pretty sure probably
the broader context is actually it's actually easy. Again, and this disturbs a lot of quote unquote Bible believers out there too, which again, I get hate mail from them too. So I guess I'm the equal opportunity offender, like I like to say. But what's going on in Ezekiel 1 is you have a description of a throne. I mean, there's someone seated on it, Okay, it's a throne. The same description occurs in Daniel chapter 7, and it's called a throne. The fiery wheels, the whole bit is found elsewhere. But you have a description of a throne, and there's this platform. Underneath the platform, there are these bovine creatures that have 4 faces, and it's a throne dais. It's a throne pedestal. Now, in the artwork of the day, and the sculpture of the day, and the statuary of the day, you find these. These are not hard to find. They're not hard to locate in the archaeological record. The 4 faces just happen to be the 4 cardinal points of the Babylonian zodiac. Why is it important that it's Babylonian? Well, because Ezekiel's in Babylon. That's where the text has him. They're in captivity in Babylon. And so there must be some connection. Why is Ezekiel using Babylonian throne imagery where the 4 faces point to the 4 cardinal points of the zodiac that the Babylonians use, but on the throne is not the Babylonian god Marduk. It happens to be Yahweh, the God of Israel. Once you have the pieces together and you can match them up with iconographic representations, then the theological messaging is pretty clear. No, it isn't Marduk that rules over all nations from corner to corner to corner to corner of the earth. It's Yahweh, the God of Israel. Even though we got our butts kicked by the Babylonians, and here we're sitting by the river Kivar in exile, I, Ezekiel, who is a priest of Israel, am writing to you, my fellow captives, and I'm telling you to not lose heart, to not lose faith. God is still on the throne, so to speak. Rather cliche-ish, but that's the point. Don't lose heart. We're not going to be here forever. We're going to get out of here, and we'll find out whose God is really God. I mean, it's a theological message using imagery of the day that would have communicated very well. It has nothing to do with flying saucers from other worlds.
But in isolation, when you say Ezekiel's wheels within wheels, then you can sort of make it sound like anything, I guess.
Sure. I mean, if Ezekiel had words like silver or silvery or round or disc in his vocabulary, we find those words elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible, but not coincidentally, none of them are used in Ezekiel 1. Okay? In other words, the very vocabulary that the ancient alien enthusiast will want to convince you of, will want to use to convince you of flying saucers elsewhere, you won't find any of that vocabulary in the chapter, even though that vocabulary is at the writer's disposal. Well, he must have done a really crummy job then of describing that flying saucer if he didn't really describe it the way we think of it elsewhere, and all these other presumably ancient texts describe discs and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's inconsistent on every level, but it is a very easy go-to passage if you're looking to pilfer an ancient text for a 21st century idea that you like.
It sounds like it's quote mining, and then on the first level, just taking the passage and then interpreting that quote mine however you want to.
It is.
We've gone into specifics there. Are there major issues besides Sitchen's stuff, which we'll get to, but are there other major points that you find come up time and time again that you've addressed with the ancient astronaut enthusiasts?
Yeah, I think it's one of their big problems is a very low view of ancient human intelligence and technological capability.
In what
way?
It
really, well, specifically in terms of like megalithic structures, moving large stones, that sort of thing, building temples and pyramids and whatnot. I mean, what you have is this isn't even science or worldview by anomaly, and of course Hoagland's famous for that.
Yes.
There's an anomaly here, so let's construct a worldview around it. This doesn't even get to that point. I'm looking at something that's really impressive, and I know I couldn't have built that, therefore no human could have built it. It must have been aliens. I mean, it's that dumb.